was holding 30 years of silence in my hands. It wasn't heavy, physically speaking. It was just a standard envelope, cream-colored, the kind you used to buy in bulk at the stationery store down on 4th Street, before the internet killed the art of writing things down. But as I stood there in the center of the attic, with dust motes dancing in the singular beam of afternoon sunlight cutting through the gloom, my knees buckled. I actually had to grab the edge of the old oak vanity to stop myself from collapsing. The paper felt brittle against my fingertips, textured like dried skin, and it smelled of lavender sachets and decay, the perfume of a life that had ended 3 days ago. My grandmother, Eleanor, had been a woman of rigid habits and ironclad secrets, but I never thought she was capable of this. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable. It was her script, elegant and looped. The ink faded from a deep royal blue to a washed-out gray. It was addressed to my mother. The stamp in the corner had never been canceled. The seal on the back, a simple lick of adhesive that had dried and yellowed over the decades, was unbroken. I looked at the date scribbled in the corner in pencil. Something she must have done to catalog her own regrets. June 14th, 1993. The day my father left. The day my mother stopped speaking to her own mother. The day our family shattered into a million jagged pieces that never quite fit back together. I wasn't ready for what I was holding. I wasn't ready to know that the villain of my mother's life might have been trying to save us all along. My breath hitched in my throat, a sharp, ragged sound in the quiet house. And for a second, I thought I heard the floorboards creak behind me, as if her ghost was standing there, watching me discover the one thing she had spent a lifetime hiding. The house had a way of holding on to the cold, even in the middle of July. It was a sprawling Victorian beast of a structure, sitting on a hill that overlooked a town that had long since forgotten its grandeur. For the last 72 hours since the funeral, I had been the only living thing inside these walls, unless you counted the mice scratching in the wainscoting. My mother, Sarah, had refused to come inside. She had sat in her car in the driveway, gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white, staring at the front porch with a mixture of hatred and terror that I couldn't comprehend. She told me to just hire a service to clear it out. She told me to burn it all. But I couldn't. I was the granddaughter, the neutral party, the Switzerland in a war I never enlisted in. Grandma Eleanor had been different with me. To my mother, she was a monster, a tyrant who had manipulated circumstances and driven my father away. Or at least, that was the narrative I had been fed since I was old enough to understand why Daddy wasn't at the dinner table. But to me, Eleanor was soft hands and warm oatmeal cookies. She was the smell of old books and the sound of humming in the garden. She was the woman who braided my hair when my mother was too busy working double shifts to keep the lights on. I looked around the attic bedroom, a space that had been forbidden to me as a child. It was exactly as she must have left it decades ago, a museum of her own solitude. There were stacks of National Geographic magazines towering like skyscrapers against the far wall, and a mannequin in the corner wearing a dress that looked half-finished, the pins still stuck in the velvet fabric. Being here felt like a violation. I was trespassing on her soul. I had spent the morning sorting through the easy stuff, clothes to be donated, kitchenware to be boxed, furniture to be covered. But the attic was where the gravity of the situation really hit me. This wasn't just about cleaning a house. It was about dismantling a person. Every object I touched felt heavy with significance. A silver hairbrush with strands of her gray hair still caught in the bristles. A pair of reading glasses folded neatly on a side table, as if she might walk in and put them on to read the morning paper. The silence was deafening. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was a heavy, expectant silence. It felt like the house was holding its breath, waiting for me to find the loose thread that would unravel the entire tapestry of lies we had been living under. My mother always said that secrets were like rot. You couldn't see them at first, but eventually, the smell would give them away. I realized now that she was right, but she had identified the wrong source of the stench. I walked over to the window, the envelope still burning a hole in my palm. Down below, I could see the overgrown garden. the rose bushes tangling with the weeds in a desperate fight for survival. Grandma loved those roses. She used to talk to them. I remembered a specific afternoon, maybe 20 years ago, when I was 7. I had found her crying by the trellis. It was the only time I ever saw her cry. When I asked her what was wrong, she had just wiped her face with her garden gloves, leaving a streak of dirt on her cheek, and said, "Sometimes, darling, the things we do for love look an awful lot like the things we do for hate." I hadn't understood it then. I barely understood it now. But looking at the envelope, I felt a chill crawl up my spine. The discovery hadn't been accidental. That was the thing that bothered me the most. If I had just been carelessly tossing things into boxes, I never would have found it. I was dismantling the old vanity table, the one with the trifold mirror that she used to sit at every morning to apply her cold cream. The wood was warped from years of humidity, and one of the drawers was stuck. I had pulled on it, frustrated, sweating in the stale heat of the attic. I pulled and yanked until the wood gave a sickening crack, and the drawer flew out, spilling its contents onto the dusty rug. There were the usual things: bobby pins, a tube of lipstick that had turned rancid, a few loose buttons. But when I went to slide the drawer back in, I saw it. There was a false bottom. It wasn't a sophisticated secret compartment like you see in spy movies. It was just a piece of thin plywood cut to fit perfectly over the real bottom of the drawer, covered in the same velvet lining. It had shifted when I yanked the drawer out. Underneath that false bottom, there was nothing but this envelope. No money, no jewelry, no will. Just this letter. Why hide a letter so carefully if you never intended to send it? And if you intended to send it, why hide it? The logic didn't track. Unless the act of writing it was the catharsis, and the act of keeping it was the penance. I ran my thumb over the raised lettering of my mother's maiden name. Miss Sarah Miller. She hadn't been a Miller since 1990. Grandma had used her maiden name in 1993, 3 years after she was married. That was a slight. A deliberate, petty, glorious slight. Or was it? Was it a denial of the marriage itself? My hands were shaking so bad I had to sit down on the edge of the bed. The mattress springs groaned, a sound of protest from the past. I felt like an intruder in a crime scene, but I wasn't sure what the crime was yet. Was it the silence? Was it the estrangement? Or was it something darker? I looked at the seal again. It was so fragile. One slide of my finger and 30 years of mystery would be over. But I hesitated. I felt a sudden, irrational fear that opening this envelope would release something I couldn't put back. It felt like Pandora's box. If Grandma wanted my mother to read this, she would have mailed it. She had 30 years of trips to the post office. She had 30 years of birthdays and Christmases where she could have slipped it into a card. She didn't. She kept it under a false bottom in a vanity in the attic. She chose to die with this sealed. Did I have the right to override her final wish? But then I thought of my mother in the car downstairs, her face a mask of bitter resolve. I thought of the way she flinched whenever anyone mentioned Grandma's name. I thought of the father I barely knew, a man who had vanished into the ether, leaving only a void where a parent should be. I deserved to know. Didn't I? I was the collateral damage of this war. The air in the room seemed to thicken, pressing against my eardrums. I heard a noise, a distinct thump, from downstairs. My heart hammered against my ribs. I froze. The house was supposed to be empty. I had locked the front door. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding thin and pathetic in the vastness of the house. Silence answered me. Just the settling of the timbers, the groaning of a house that was slowly dying. But the feeling of being watched intensified. I looked back at the vanity. The space where the drawer had been looked like a gaping mouth. I noticed something else inside the cavity. Something I had missed in my initial frenzy to grab the letter. I leaned forward, squinting into the darkness of the furniture's interior. There was something taped to the underside of the vanity top, hidden so deeply you would have to be lying on the floor to see it, or looking through the gap of a missing drawer. I reached in, my fingers brushing against cobwebs that felt like sticky lace. I felt cold metal. I pulled. It was a key. A small, iron key, rusted and heavy for its size. It was taped with old masking tape that had lost its adhesive, so it came away easily in my hand. What did this open? It certainly wasn't for any door in this house. The house keys were brass and modern. This looked like it belonged to a dungeon, or a very old, very secure chest. I held the letter in one hand and the key in the other. Two artifacts of a hidden life. The letter was the narrative, the story she wanted to tell, but couldn't. The key was the physical proof of something else. I looked at the date on the letter again. June 14th, 1993. I did the math in my head. I was 4 years old. That was the summer we stayed at the lake house. The summer before everything went wrong. I had a sudden flash of memory, visceral and bright. The smell of pine needles, the sound of water lapping against the dock, and loud voices, shouting, not just arguing, but screaming. I remembered hiding under the kitchen table, clutching a stuffed bear, watching my father's boots stomp out of the room. I remembered Grandma standing in the doorway, her silhouette blocking the light, looking like a statue made of stone. And I remembered my mother sobbing, a sound that seemed to tear her throat apart. I had always assumed that fight was about money or infidelity, the usual suburban tragedies. But looking at this letter, I realized the timing was too precise. Grandma wrote this the day the world ended for us. I carefully placed the key in my pocket. It felt cold against my hip. I turned the envelope over. I needed to open it. I needed to know why she had let us hate her, why she had let my mother believe whatever lie had caused the silence. I took a deep breath, the smell of dust and lavender filling my lungs, and slid my index finger under the flap of the envelope. The paper tore with a sound that was louder than a gunshot in the quiet room. Reap. I pulled out the folded sheets of paper. There were 3 of them, covered front and back in that same looping, elegant script. My eyes scanned the first line, and the breath left my body completely. It didn't start with Dear Sarah, or my dearest daughter. It started with a confession. I am writing this because I am a coward, the letter began. And because if I told you the truth to your face, you would never let me do what needs to be done to save him. Save him? Who was him? My father? My grandfather was already dead by then. Who was she trying to save? And from what? I sank onto the floor, ignoring the dust that coated my jeans. The sunlight was fading now, the beam of light turning orange and stretching across the floorboards like a warning track. I adjusted the paper to catch the dying light and began to read. The words weren't just ink on paper. They were a roadmap to a tragedy I had been living in without ever knowing the geography. You think he left you because he didn't love you anymore, she wrote. You think he walked out that door because he was weak or because he found someone else. I let you believe that. I had to let you believe that. Because the truth would have killed you, Sarah. The truth is, he didn't leave. I made him go. The world tilted on its axis. My grandmother, the woman who baked cookies and hummed in the garden, had forced my father out. How? Why? My father was a big man, stubborn and proud. Grandma was 5'2" and weighed hardly anything. How could she make him do anything? I read on, my eyes devouring the words, desperate for context. I found what he was keeping in the basement of the lake house, the letter continued. I found the ledger. I found the cash. And I found the names. He wasn't just gambling, Sarah. It wasn't just debts. He was stealing from the wrong people, dangerous people. They came to me first. They gave me a choice. They said if he disappeared, the debt would disappear. If he stayed, they would take it out on you. And on little Emma. I gasped, my hand flying to my mouth. Little Emma. Me. She did it to protect me. But why hide the letter? If this exonerated her, if this proved she was a hero protecting her family from mobsters or loan sharks, why didn't she scream it from the rooftops? Why let her daughter hate her for 30 years? Why die with the reputation of a villain? I paid him to leave, the letter went on. I gave him everything I had left from your father's insurance money. I bought his life, and I bought your safety. But the condition was silence. He could never tell you why. And neither could I. If you knew, you would have followed him. You would have tried to fix it, and they would have killed you both. So I became the villain. I let you hate me. I let you think I was a meddling, cruel old woman who drove your husband away because he wasn't good enough. It was easier for you to hate me than to mourn a man who was still alive but couldn't be yours. Tears were streaming down my face now, hot and fast, dripping onto the yellowed paper. She had sacrificed her relationship with her only daughter to keep us safe. She had accepted the role of the antagonist in her own family's story just to ensure we had a future. It was a level of love so fierce and so painful, I couldn't wrap my head around it. But then, as I turned to the second page, the tone changed. The writing became shakier, less composed. But that isn't the only reason I am writing this, the second page read. There is something else. Something I kept even from him. The money I gave him. It wasn't enough. It bought time. But it didn't buy freedom. I had to give them something else as collateral. Something I have kept hidden in this house for 30 years, waiting for the day they might come back for it. If you are reading this, it means I am dead, and the deal is broken. You need to find the key. My hand flew to my pocket. The cold iron key. I had it. The key opens the heavy safe in the cellar, she wrote. Not the one in the study. The one behind the wine rack. I walled it up in 1994. You have to break the false wall. Inside, you will find what I really traded for your life. And God forgive me, Sarah, when you see it, you might wish I had just let them kill us. A chill that had nothing to do with the drafty attic swept through me. This wasn't just a story about a grandmother protecting her family from bad debts. This was something else. Collateral. Walled it up. God forgive me. What could she possibly have locked away in a cellar that was worth a human life? And why was she terrified of us finding it? I stood up, the letter clutched in my hand like a weapon. The silence of the house was no longer expectant. It was menacing. The shadows in the corners seemed to stretch and twist. I wasn't just a granddaughter cleaning out an attic anymore. I was a player in a game that had started 30 years ago. A game with dangerous people and deadly stakes. And I was holding the next move. I needed to go to the cellar. I needed to see what was behind the wine rack. But first, I had to tell my mother. Or did I? If you knew, you would have followed him. Grandma's warning echoed in my head. If I showed this to Mom now, in the state she was in, sitting in the car downstairs, what would she do? She would shatter. Or she would storm in here and tear the house apart. I decided to go alone. I had to know first. I had to be the filter. I stuffed the letter into my back pocket and grabbed the flashlight I had brought up with me. The beam cut through the gathering dusk, illuminating the dust particles that swirled around me like ghosts. I walked out of the attic, the floorboards groaning under my weight, sounding like a chorus of warnings. Don't go down there. Leave it buried. Some secrets are meant to rot. As I reached the landing of the second floor, I heard it again. A noise from downstairs. But this time, it wasn't a thump. It was the sound of the front door opening. The slow, distinctive creak of the heavy oak door that I had locked. I froze on the stairs, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Had Mom changed her mind? Had she come in? Mom? I whispered, leaning over the banister. No answer. Just the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps moving across the hardwood floor of the entryway. Boots, heavy boots. My mother wore sneakers. These were heavy, rhythmic steps. Clack, clack, clack. They stopped at the base of the stairs. I couldn't see who it was from my angle, hidden by the curve of the staircase. But I could hear breathing. Heavy, wet breathing. And then, a voice. a voice that sounded like gravel grinding together, a voice that didn't belong to anyone I knew. "Eleanor," the voice rasped. "We know you're in there. Time's up." My blood turned to ice. They didn't know she was dead. They didn't know the funeral was 3 days ago. They thought she was still here. "They came to me first," the letter had said. They were back. The debt wasn't cleared. The collateral was being called in. I was trapped on the second floor of a house with a letter that explained a 30-year-old crime, a key to a hidden safe, and a stranger downstairs who thought my dead grandmother was still alive. And the only weapon I had was a flashlight and a terrifying realization. The danger hadn't ended in 1993. It had just been waiting. I stopped breathing. It wasn't a conscious choice. My body simply shut down all non-essential functions to focus entirely on the sound of those boots on the hardwood floor below. Clack. Pause. Clack. The stranger was moving with the arrogance of ownership, walking through a house that wasn't his, calling out to a woman who was already 6 feet under. I pressed my back against the hallway wall, clutching the letter to my chest like a shield, the rusted key burning a hole in my pocket. The flashlight was off, but the moon was starting to rise, casting long, skeletal shadows through the banister rails. "Eleanor," the voice rasped again, closer to the stairs this time. "Don't make this difficult. We respected the deal as long as you held up your end. But silence has an expiration date." He started to climb the stairs. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded my veins. There was nowhere to go. The attic stairs were behind me, but if I went up there, I'd be trapped in a cul-de-sac. The bedrooms were off the hallway. I looked at the master bedroom door. Grandma's room. It was slightly ajar. I slipped inside, my socks sliding silently on the carpet, and pushed the door closed until it clicked softly. I didn't lock it. A locked door screams that someone is hiding. An unlocked door suggests emptiness. I dove under the massive 4-poster bed, sliding into the darkness amongst the dust bunnies and the smell of cedar wood. From my vantage point, I could only see a slice of the room, the floral rug, the legs of the vanity, and the space under the door. I heard the footsteps reach the landing. They paused. Then, they moved down the hall. A door opened. The guest room. Then closed. Another door. The bathroom. The footsteps were getting closer to the master bedroom. My heart was beating so hard I was terrified the vibration would shake the floorboards. I saw the door push open. 2 heavy, mud-caked work boots stepped onto the floral rug. They were large, terrifyingly utilitarian. The man stood there for a long moment. I could hear the fabric of his jacket rustle as he turned. He was scanning the room. "I know you're not deaf, old woman," he muttered. He walked over to the dresser. I heard the sound of drawers being ripped open and contents being dumped out. He wasn't searching carefully. He was tossing the room. He was looking for something specific, the collateral. Suddenly, a car horn honked from outside. Long, impatient blasts. Beep, beep, beep. My mother, Sarah. She was in the driveway, probably wondering why I was taking so long. The boots stopped moving. The man swore under his breath, a low, violent curse. He walked to the window, the one overlooking the driveway. I saw his shadow stretch across the floor, distorted and menacing. He watched for a second, then turned back to the room. "Lucky day," he whispered. He didn't check under the bed. He turned and walked out, his pace faster now. I listened as he descended the stairs, heavy and purposeful. The front door opened and closed. I waited 10 seconds, 20, a full minute. Then I scrambled out from under the bed, my limbs shaking so bad I could barely stand. I crawled to the window and peeked through the lace curtains. A black sedan was parked on the street, half hidden by the overgrown hedges. A man in a dark jacket was getting into the driver's seat. He didn't look like a mobster from a movie. He looked like a contractor, or a plumber, someone you wouldn't look at twice in a grocery store. That made him scarier. He blended in. As he drove away, I saw him pick up a phone. He was calling someone, reporting that the house wasn't empty, or reporting that he couldn't find what he was looking for. I didn't wait to find out. I ran downstairs, skipping steps, almost tripping over my own feet. I bolted out the front door and ran to my mother's car. She was sitting there with the engine running, her face tight with annoyance. When I yanked the passenger door open and threw myself inside, she jumped. Jesus, Emma. What took you so long? I've been honking for 5 minutes. I want to get out of this place before it gets dark. It gives me the creeps. I looked at her. Really looked at her. Her face was lined with the bitterness she had carried for 30 years. She had her hand on the gear shift, ready to drive away from the past. She didn't know that the past had just been upstairs rifling through her mother's underwear drawer. "We can't leave," I said, my voice breathless. "Excuse me? Watch me." She started to put the car in reverse. I grabbed her arm. "No, Mom, stop. We have to go back inside." "Are you insane?" She pulled her arm away, her eyes narrowing. "I told you, I'm not stepping foot in that mausoleum. You grab the boxes, we hire a crew for the rest, and we sell it. End of story." "Mom, listen to me," I shouted. The volume of my voice shocked both of us. The car went silent, save for the hum of the engine. Someone was in there, just now. Her face went pale. "What? A squatter?" "No, not a squatter. A man looking for Eleanor. A man who knew her. He was looking for something." I pulled the letter out of my pocket. It was crumpled now, stained with my sweat. He was looking for what this talks about. Mom looked at the envelope. She recognized the handwriting instantly. Her expression shifted from fear to a cold, hard mask of anger. "A letter? You stayed in there for an hour to read her diary?" "It's addressed to you, Mom. It's from 1993. "I don't want it." She looked straight ahead, her jaw set. "Burn it." "Mom, read the damn letter." I shoved it toward her. "Dad didn't leave you because he stopped loving you. Grandma made him leave because he was in trouble with the mob. She paid them off to save your life. She saved us." The silence in the car was heavy, suffocating. Mom turned to me slowly, her eyes wide with a mix of disbelief and fury. "That is the most ridiculous lie she has ever invented. Even from the grave, she's trying to manipulate me." "The mob? Emma, please. Your father was a salesman. He sold insurance. He was gambling, Mom. He stole from them. Read it." "I won't." Her voice broke. "I can't." "Fine," I said, hardening my resolve. "Then don't read it. But we have to go to the cellar. Right now." "Why?" "Because," I said, holding up the rusted iron key. "Because she didn't just pay them off with money. She kept something of theirs. Collateral. That man upstairs? He said silence has an expiration date. He's coming back, Mom. And if we don't find whatever is in that safe before they do, we are in serious trouble." Mom looked at the house, looming dark and jagged against the twilight sky. Then she looked at me. She saw the terror in my eyes, the absolute certainty. For the first time in my life, I wasn't her little girl. I was the leader. "The cellar?" she whispered, "behind the wine rack." She turned off the car. I hated that wine rack. It was always so excessive. We got out of the car. The wind had picked up, rustling the dead leaves in the driveway. It sounded like footsteps. We walked to the front door together, 2 generations of women stepping into a trap set 3 decades ago. The basement smelled of earth and damp concrete. It was colder down here, a bone-deep chill that made my teeth chatter. The only light came from my flashlight and the flashlight app on Mom's phone, which she held with a trembling hand. "This is crazy," Mom muttered, her voice echoing off the stone walls. "We are chasing ghosts, Emma. There is no safe behind the wine rack. It's a solid brick wall. I remember when your grandfather built it. Grandma said she walled it up in 1994, I said, moving the beam of light across the room. The wine rack was a massive, floor-to-ceiling wooden structure covering the entire back wall. It was filled with dusty bottles of vinegar and cheap red wine that had turned to sludge years ago. "Help me move it," I said. "It's bolted to the wall," Mom said, but she stepped forward anyway. We grabbed the edges of the heavy oak frame. 1, 2, 3, pull. It groaned. Dust rained down on us. We pulled again, straining, our shoes slipping on the concrete floor. With a screech of metal giving way, the rack detached from the wall at the top and tilted forward. Bottles crashed to the floor, shattering, the smell of sour wine filling the air like blood. We shoved the rack aside, letting it crash onto the floor. Behind it, the wall looked different. The mortar was a slightly lighter shade of gray. The bricks were uneven. "Oh my God," Mom whispered. She reached out and touched the rough surface. "She did build this." "Stand back," I said. I looked around for something heavy. There was an old sledgehammer in the corner, leaning against the furnace. It looked too heavy for me, but adrenaline is a powerful drug. I dragged it over. I swung. The impact sent a shockwave up my arms, jarring my shoulders. Dust exploded. I swung again, and again. A brick cracked, then another. Within 5 minutes, sweating and panting, I had created a hole large enough to see through. There was a void behind the bricks. And inside that void, resting on a small wooden shelf, was a black metal safe. It looked industrial, heavy-duty. I reached through the hole, my arm scraping against the jagged brick, and felt for the keyhole. I inserted the rusted iron key. It fit perfectly. I turned it. Click-thunk. The door of the safe swung open. "What's inside?" Mom asked, her voice barely audible. I shone the flashlight into the safe. It wasn't full of money. It wasn't full of diamonds. There was a single, thick, leather-bound ledger, and next to it, a clear plastic bag containing a cassette tape and a stack of Polaroid photographs, held together by a rubber band that had snapped with age. I pulled them out. The ledger was heavy. I handed it to Mom. She opened it. "This..." Mom frowned, squinting at the pages in the flashlight beam. "This is Dad's handwriting. These are numbers, dates, names." She flipped the pages frantically. Amounts, huge amounts, $50,000, $100,000. "Delivery to Sal. Pick up from the docks." "It's the proof," I said. "He was laundering money." "No," Mom said, her voice shaking. "Emma, look at the margin notes." I looked closer. In the margins, in red ink, there were corrections. Notes, instructions. "Don't deposit until Friday. Split this into 3 accounts. Use the shell company in Jersey." "That's not Dad's handwriting," I said. That's mine," Mom said. I froze. "What?" "No," she corrected herself, horror dawning on her face. "It's not mine. It looks like mine, but it's her. It's Eleanor's." My grandmother's handwriting was almost identical to my mother's, but why was she correcting the money laundering ledger? "Open the bag," Mom commanded, her voice hard now. I took out the cassette tape. There was nothing to play it on. But the photos... I shuffled through them. The first photo was of my father. He looked young, handsome, smiling at a table full of men in suits. He looked happy. The second photo was of my father shaking hands with a man I didn't recognize. A man with a scar on his chin. The third photo changed everything. It was a picture of my father and another woman. She was beautiful, blonde, laughing. They were on a boat. He had his arm around her. She was pregnant. "Who is that?" I asked. Mom snatched the photo. She stared at it, her eyes wide, unblinking. "That's Linda, his secretary. She looks pregnant." Mom flipped the photo over. On the back, in my father's handwriting, it said, "New Beginnings, 1993. "He didn't leave to protect us," Mom whispered. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She staggered back, hitting the wall. "He didn't leave because of the mob." Mom? He was stealing the mob's money to run away with her, Mom said, her voice trembling with a rage so pure it felt hot in the cold room. He wasn't a victim. He was a thief and a cheater. But the letter, I stammered. Grandma said she paid him to leave. She said she made him go. Look at the last document. Mom pointed to a folded piece of paper at the bottom of the bag. I unfolded it. It wasn't a love letter. It was a contract. A typed, legal-looking document, signed by my father and Eleanor. I, Robert Miller, agree to relinquish all parental rights and sever all contact with Sarah and Emma Miller, in exchange for the sum of $250,000 and the guarantee of safe passage provided by Eleanor Vance. I acknowledge that the evidence of my theft held by Eleanor Vance will be released to the associates if I ever return. My brain spun. Grandma hadn't forced a loving father away to save him from debt. She had caught him stealing from the mob to run away with his mistress. She had used the stolen ledger, the evidence of his crimes, to blackmail him. She paid him off not to save him, but to make him disappear so my mother wouldn't find out he was abandoning her for another family. She didn't play the villain to protect us from the mob. She played the villain to protect my mother's heart. She let her daughter believe she was a controlling monster, rather than let her know her husband was a scumbag who sold his family for a fresh start. She knew, Mom whispered. Tears were streaming down her face, cutting through the dust. She knew he was leaving me. She knew about Linda. And instead of telling me, instead of letting me be broken by the truth, she let me hate her. She took the blame. She bought your pride, I said, the realization settling over me. She paid $250,000 so you could believe your husband was a tragic hero or a victim, rather than a man who threw you away. Collateral, Mom said, looking at the ledger. She kept the ledger. If the mob found this, they would know Dad stole from them. And if Dad ever came back, she threatened to give this to the mob. It was her insurance policy to keep him away from us. And now the mob wants it back, I said. Because with Grandma dead, the threat is gone, a voice said from the top of the stairs. We both spun around, blinding ourselves with our flashlights. The man with the boots was standing at the top of the cellar stairs. He was holding a gun. And he wasn't alone. Another man stepped up beside him. Robert Miller died 3 weeks ago in Florida, the man said, descending the first step. The wood creaked ominously. Cancer. Nasty business. But before he died, he got talkative. He told us he didn't steal our money alone. He told us his mother-in-law was the brains, that she had the books. The twist twisted again. My father, even in death, was a coward. He had blamed Grandma to save his own reputation with these people? Or maybe he just wanted one last screw you to the woman who bested him. We want the ledger, the man said, and the interest on 30 years of silence. The cellar felt suddenly like a tomb. There was no exit, just the stairs, blocked by 2 men with guns, and the cold concrete walls closing in. Mom was holding the ledger against her chest, her breathing jagged and shallow. You're not getting it, Mom said. Her voice was shaking, but there was a steeliness in it I hadn't heard before. Lady, don't be stupid, the man sneered. He took another step down. Your mother was a tough old bird. She held that leverage over our heads for decades. If anything happens to me or my family, the ledger goes to the feds. That was the deal. But she's dead. And we know you don't have the contacts to send that to anyone who matters. You think I don't? Mom stepped forward, shielding me. You think I don't know exactly who to call? My mother left instructions. She was bluffing. I knew she was bluffing. The letter hadn't mentioned instructions on who to call. It just said to find the key. I don't believe you, the man said, raising the gun. Give me the book. Mom, I whispered, tugging on her sleeve. Give it to him. No, she hissed. She looked at the man. You want this book because it has names. Names of people who are probably very powerful now. Politicians? Judges? The man's jaw tightened. Give it to me. Why didn't you come for her sooner? Mom yelled, her voice echoing off the walls. If she was such a threat, why wait until she died? Because she had a dead man's switch, the man shouted back, losing his composure. She mailed copies, to a lawyer, to a journalist. If she didn't call in every week, the copies would be released. We couldn't touch her. Mom looked at me, a look of absolute devastation and awe. Grandma had lived 30 years calling a specific number every single week, checking in, keeping the wolves at bay, all while her own daughter wouldn't even pick up the phone to wish her a happy birthday. The discipline, the loneliness. So the copies are still out there, Mom said. The lawyer died last year. The journalist is in a nursing home with dementia. The chain is broken. We checked. Now hand it over. He was 3 steps away. Mom, I said. The furnace. Mom looked at me, confused. Then she saw where I was looking. The old oil furnace behind us. It had an incinerator door. It was cold, obviously, but the cavity was deep. If I can't have the truth, Mom said, her voice breaking. No one can. She turned and hurled the ledger toward the furnace. But she missed. It hit the concrete floor and slid right into the sump pump well in the corner. The pit was full of standing water. Dark, oily, murky water. The ledger splashed in. No! The gunman screamed. He scrambled down the remaining stairs, ignoring us, diving for the hole. Run! Mom grabbed my hand. We scrambled past him as he fell to his knees, plunging his hands into the filthy water to fish out the book. The second man at the top of the stairs hesitated, aiming his gun, but Mom shoved the heavy oak wine rack, the one we had detached, and it swung wildly, blocking the staircase for a split second. We sprinted up the stairs, ducking under the man's arm. A gunshot rang out. Bang. Ideally, in a movie, the bullet hits a wall. In reality, the sound was so loud it deafened me. I felt a stinging sensation on my arm, like a bee sting, but I didn't stop. We burst into the hallway, then out the front door, into the cool night air. We didn't go to the car. The car was a trap. They could block the driveway. The woods, Mom screamed. Go to the neighbors. We ran through the overgrown garden, the thorns of Grandma's prized roses tearing at our clothes. We scrambled over the low stone wall and into the darkness of the ravine that separated our property from the Miller estate next door. We didn't stop running until we saw the porch lights of the neighbors. We collapsed on their lawn, gasping for air, our lungs burning. I looked at my arm. A graze. Just a line of red. I looked at Mom. She was on her knees, staring back at her mother's house. It was dark and silent on the hill. She knew. Mom sobbed, clutching the grass. She knew everything. She protected me from the truth about Dad. She protected us from them, and I let her die alone. She wasn't alone, Mom, I said, putting my arm around her. She had her mission. She was the guard at the gate. But who guards the guard? Mom whispered. Sirens wailed in the distance. The neighbors had heard the shot. The blue and red lights of the police cruisers strobed against the Victorian facade of the house, turning the peeling white paint into a bruised purple. It was chaotic, loud, and utterly at odds with the silence that had suffocated this property for 30 years. The 2 men had been apprehended 3 miles down the road, their car stuck in a ditch after they panicked. The ledger, the damp, ruined book of sins, was now in an evidence bag, disintegrating into pulp. I sat on the tailgate of an ambulance, a blanket wrapped around my shoulders. The medic had cleaned the graze on my arm. It was superficial, a battle scar from a war I hadn't known I was fighting until an hour ago. Mom was sitting next to me. She hadn't said a word for 20 minutes. She was staring at the house, her face stripped of all the bitterness, leaving only a raw, exposed grief. She kept us safe, Mom whispered, her voice cracking. All this time. She was the wall. She was, I said softly. Mom looked down at her hands. I didn't even cry at her funeral, Emma. I stood there and I felt relieved. I felt relieved that the wicked witch was gone. I thought I was finally free of her judgment. She let out a sob that sounded like something breaking. And the whole time, she was the prisoner. She was the one serving the sentence. I reached into my back pocket. The letter. It was crumpled, slightly damp from the humidity and our run through the grass, but it was still legible. "Mom," I said, "there's one more page. We didn't finish it." Mom recoiled slightly, as if the paper itself could burn her. "Is there more bad news? Did she sell my soul too?" "We need to know the whole truth," I said. "We owe her that." I unfolded the last sheet of paper. The handwriting here was different. It was jagged, pressed hard into the paper, as if writing it caused her physical pain. "Read it," Mom said, closing her eyes. I cleared my throat, the sound small against the static of the police radios. "There is one last thing you must know, Sarah. And this is the part that will be hardest for you to forgive, because it wasn't about protecting you from the mob. It was about protecting you from yourself." I paused. Mom opened her eyes. "I told you that I paid Robert to leave. That is true. But I didn't tell you where the money came from. You always assumed I had a nest egg, or that your father left me comfortable. You know that wasn't true. We were never rich." "I didn't just sell the stocks, Sarah. I didn't just mortgage the house to the hilt. I sold the rights to your art." Mom gasped. Her hand flew to her mouth. My mother had been a painter, a brilliant one. In the early 90s, she was on the verge of a breakthrough. She had a gallery interested in New York. She had a portfolio that everyone said was genius. And then, it all vanished. She stopped painting the day Dad left. She always told me she lost the inspiration. She told me she had to get a real job to support us. "The gallery owner in Soho," the letter continued. "Mr. Henderson, he offered to buy your entire collection. The rights, the originals, everything. He wanted to launch you, but I needed the cash that week. I needed it to pay off the debt before they hurt Emma. So I went to him behind your back. I sold him everything, every canvas, every sketch. But with a condition. I told him he could never exhibit them under your name. He bought them as anonymous works to be sold to private collectors overseas. I took the lump sum, $200,000, and I added it to the pile for Robert. I stole your career to save your life. I knew that if I told you, you would have chosen your art. You would have risked the danger to keep your dreams. You were always so passionate, so fiery. You would have fought them, and you would have lost. So I took the choice away from you. I killed the artist to save the mother." Mom was shaking. Tears were streaming down her cheeks, but they weren't tears of anger anymore. They were tears of devastating clarity. "I watched you work double shifts at the diner for 20 years, Grandma wrote. I watched you come home with aching feet and dead eyes. I watched you forget how to hold a brush. And every day I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell you that your paintings were hanging in penthouses in Tokyo and London. That you were brilliant. That you didn't fail. But I couldn't. Because the money was blood money. If you knew where it went, the lie would unravel. I sacrificed your dream to ensure your future. I am so sorry, my darling girl. I hope one day, when you are safe, you can pick up a brush again. The talent didn't leave with Robert. It didn't leave with the canvases. It lives in your hands. It always has." The silence that followed was heavy, sacred. My mother looked at her hands, her calloused, tired hands that had spent 30 years scrubbing tables and typing data entries. She flexed her fingers. "She sold them," Mom whispered. "She sold my paintings. To pay off Dad's debt," I said gently. "To keep the hitmen away from my crib." "I thought I wasn't good enough," Mom sobbed. "I stopped painting because I thought, if he left me, I must be worthless. And if the gallery suddenly went silent, I thought the world didn't want me. The world wanted you, Mom. Grandma knew the world wanted you. She just knew the world wanted to kill us more. Mom stood up. She walked away from the ambulance toward the edge of the police tape. She looked up at the attic window, dark now against the night sky. "You crazy old woman," Mom cried out, her voice breaking into the night. "You stubborn, controlling, brilliant, crazy old woman." She fell to her knees in the wet grass, finally mourning the mother she had lost. Not 3 days ago, but 30 years ago. She mourned the years of hatred. She mourned the art she never made. She mourned the love that had been disguised as indifference. I walked over and knelt beside her. We held each other in the shadow of the house that had been a fortress, a prison, and a bank vault all at once. I stood in the doorway of what used to be the dining room. It didn't look like a dining room anymore. The heavy mahogany table was gone. The dusty curtains were pulled down, letting the autumn light flood in through the bay windows. The floor was covered in drop cloth splattered with cerulean blue and cadmium yellow. Mom was standing at an easel in the center of the room. She was wearing one of Grandma's old oversized cardigans, the sleeves rolled up to her elbows. Her hair was tied back in a messy bun, secured with a paintbrush. She was humming. I hadn't heard her hum in my entire life. "It's good," I said, looking at the canvas. It was an abstract piece, chaotic and dark at the bottom, but breaking into blinding white light at the top. It looked like an explosion. It looked like the truth. Mom turned and smiled. It was a real smile, one that reached her eyes. The lines of bitterness around her mouth had softened. "It's getting there. It feels rusty, but familiar. We didn't sell the house. We couldn't. Not after we knew what it stood for. The police had cleared everything up. The associates were dismantling, their leverage gone, their anonymity broken by the investigation into the shooting. We were safe. Finally. Truly safe. I walked into the room and placed a box on the floor. I finished going through the attic. Mom stopped painting. She looked at the box. "Anything else hidden in false bottoms?" "No," I smiled. "Just photos. Normal ones." I picked up a framed photograph from the top of the pile. It was from that summer at the lake, 1993. Before the fight, before the letter. It was a candid shot. Grandma was sitting on the dock, her feet in the water. Mom was sitting next to her, sketching on a pad. Grandma was looking at Mom, not at the camera. The look on her face wasn't the stern mask I remembered. It was a look of fierce, terrifying, overwhelming adoration. She was looking at her daughter like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. "I put the letter in a frame," I said. Mom nodded. She pointed to the mantelpiece above the fireplace. There, in a simple wooden frame, were the 3 pages of the letter. The paper was yellowed, the edges torn, the tear stains still visible. It wasn't just a letter anymore. It was a testament. "I used to think love was soft," Mom said, wiping her hands on a rag. She walked over to the window, looking out at the rose garden which we had finally started to prune. "I thought love was hugs and kind words and 'I'm proud of you.' And when she stopped giving me that, I thought the love was gone." She turned to me. "But I was wrong, Emma. Love isn't always soft. Sometimes love is a shield. Sometimes it's a lie that lets you sleep at night. Sometimes love is standing in the doorway and letting your own daughter hate you, just so she doesn't have to carry the weight of the truth. She carried it all," I said. "So we didn't have to." "Yeah," Mom whispered. She looked back at the painting. She picked up her brush and dipped it into the red paint, a deep, rich crimson. She added a single stroke to the heart of the chaotic darkness on the canvas. It looked like a wound, but it also looked like a beating heart. "I'm painting again, Mom," she said to the empty room, her voice steady. "And this one is for you. It's titled, 'The Guard.'" I left her there, painting in the house that was no longer a mausoleum, but a studio. I walked out onto the porch. The air was crisp. The for sale sign we had almost planted in the yard was gone. I touched the scar on my arm. It had healed into a thin white line. A reminder. We spend our lives looking for the truth, thinking it will set us free. But sometimes, the truth is a heavy burden. And sometimes, the people who love us most are the ones who hide it from us, carrying the weight on their own backs until their knees buckle, just so we can walk tall. Grandma Eleanor wasn't a villain. She was the greatest showrunner of all. She wrote a script where she was the monster, so we could be the survivors. And finally, 30 years late, the credits had rolled.